lost forever in the Alaskan wilderness. This story is a dramatization. The people you're about to hear about, the specific timeline, and some of the events are fictional. They were created to represent the countless real-life struggles for survival that happen in the Alaskan wilderness. This story is inspired by the documented challenges search and rescue teams face, and the very real dangers of one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. So while the characters aren't real, the courage of the searchers, the heartbreak of the families, and the formidable power of the wild are all drawn from truth. Alaska. For most people, it's the ultimate adventure, a land of stunning beauty and a truly untamed spirit. It's the final frontier, a place to test your limits against the raw, unfiltered power of nature. It's a dream destination for explorers, adventurers, and anyone who's ever felt the pull of the wild. For four friends from the American Midwest, it was more than a dream. It was a promise they had made to each other, a celebration of a lifelong friendship. It was the trip they had spent years planning. But in the vast, unforgiving wilderness near Nome, a landscape carved by ice and wind, that dream turned into an icy nightmare. They went looking for adventure, but were swallowed by the silence. They were lost forever. This is the story of their disappearance, the personal hopes that led them to the edge of the world, and the heroic, heartbreaking search that gripped a community and left a family with nothing but questions. Part 1. The Dream. David and Eleanor Henderson were the kind of couple you couldn't help but admire. They were high school sweethearts from a small town in Ohio, and their love story was one of quiet, steady devotion. David, a 58-year-old history professor, was a man of books and maps. He loved tracing ancient routes and understanding the great migrations of history. For him, Alaska was the ultimate history book, a living museum of geological time, pioneer spirit, and indigenous culture stretching back thousands of years. He'd spent countless hours reading about the gold rush, the Iditarod, and the sheer, brutal resilience it took to carve out a life in the frozen north. Eleanor, a year younger, was a retired nurse, the anchor of their family and her community. Where David was calm and thoughtful, Eleanor was all heart and bustling energy. She was a gardener, a baker, a woman who nurtured everything she touched. She wasn't as obsessed with historical footnotes as David was, but she was deeply in love with the idea of wild, untamed beauty. She had a passion for photography, and her dream was to capture the aurora borealis, the northern lights, in a photograph she could frame and hang over their fireplace. That one goal had become the symbolic heart of their trip. They weren't going alone. With them were their closest friends, Ben and Chloe Clark. The Clarks were younger, in their late 40s, and brought a different energy to the group. Ben was a contractor, a man who built things with his hands and had a seemingly bottomless well of practical knowledge. He was the one who researched the best all-terrain vehicles, the most reliable gear, and the safest routes. He saw Alaska not as a text to be read, but as a structure to be understood and navigated. He was confident, capable, and felt a deep, fatherly responsibility for the group's safety. Chloe, his wife, was an artist, a painter who worked with bold colors and broad strokes. She saw the world in shapes and light. While Eleanor wanted to capture Alaska's beauty through a lens, Chloe wanted to feel it, to absorb the palette of the tundra, the stark white of the snow, the deep blues of glacial ice, and translate it all onto canvas. She packed a small set of watercolors, hoping to capture the feeling of the place, not just its image. For 5 years, the four of them held Alaska nights. They'd get together at one of their homes, poring over maps, watching documentaries, and reading travelogues. They planned every single detail with a mix of excitement and reverence. They booked flights to the remote town of Nome, a place steeped in gold rush history, perched right on the edge of the Bering Sea. They chose Nome because it felt like the real Alaska, far from the polished tourist trails of the southeast. It was a gateway to the raw, untamed Seward Peninsula. Their plan was simple: spend 2 weeks exploring the rugged network of roads branching out from town, staying in rented cabins, hiking during the day, and hoping for a glimpse of the aurora at night. It was meant to be the culmination of their friendship, a grand adventure to mark a new chapter in their lives. In late September 2024, they finally arrived. Their first few days were everything they had hoped for. The crisp autumn air was electric, and the tundra was painted in shades of rust and gold. They posted photos online, the four of them beaming in front of the famous arches marking the end of the Iditarod Trail, a blurry shot of a musk ox on a distant hill, a selfie with the vast, gray expanse of the Bering Sea behind them. Eleanor's captions were filled with awe. "It's even bigger and more beautiful than we dreamed," she wrote under a photo of a fiery sunset. Feeling so small in the best possible way, they were in constant touch with their families back home, describing the profound silence of the wilderness, a quiet so deep it felt like you could touch it. They talked about the kindness of the people in Nome, the sense of a community bound together by isolation. In every phone call and text, their joy was obvious. They were living their dream. But the Alaskan wilderness, indifferent and unforgiving, was waiting. And out in that vastness, their dream was about to end. Part 2. The Disappearance. The plan for Day 4 was their most ambitious yet. They were going to drive the Nome Council Highway, a 72-mile gravel road that winds its way east through some of the most remote country on the Seward Peninsula. The road, a relic of the gold rush, is a lifeline in the summer but a real challenge in the fall. It crosses rivers, skirts mountains, and cuts through vast, open tundra. Their destination was the ghost town of Council, once a bustling hub for gold miners, now just a collection of weathered cabins and memories. David, the history professor, was especially excited. For him, visiting Council was like stepping back in time. The morning they left, the weather was clear but cold. A sharp wind was blowing in from the sea, carrying the first real bite of winter. Ben, always the pragmatist, checked the forecast. It called for more clouds and a chance of snow flurries later in the day, but nothing that seemed dangerous. They were well equipped. Their rented four-wheel drive SUV was packed with extra food, water, blankets, and emergency supplies. Ben had even rented a satellite phone, a precaution that made everyone feel secure. Around 9 a.m., Chloe posted one last photo. It was a picture of the road stretching out before them, a narrow gravel ribbon disappearing into a massive, treeless landscape under an endless sky. The caption was simple, "Off the grid. See you on the other side." Their last confirmed contact came an hour later. Eleanor sent a quick text to her daughter, Sarah. It was a photo of a small, wooden bridge crossing a half-frozen river. The message read, "Crossing the Solomon River. Scenery is unbelievable. David is in heaven. Talk tonight. Love you." The message went through. Sarah replied with a heart emoji, expecting to hear from her mom that evening as promised. But that evening, the phone never rang. At first, Sarah wasn't too worried. She knew they were in a remote area where cell service was spotty at best. She pictured them sitting by a fire in a rustic cabin, totally lost in the moment. She went to bed, figuring a call would come in the morning. When morning arrived with still no word, a knot of anxiety began to tighten in her stomach. She called Ben and Chloe's son, Daniel. He hadn't heard from them either. Together, they tried calling the satellite phone. It just rang and rang, each tone echoing into a terrifying silence. By noon, their anxiety had turned into real fear. This wasn't like them. Eleanor always checked in. Ben was the most responsible person they knew. For all four of them to be out of contact for this long just felt wrong. Shaking, Sarah made the call to the Alaska State Troopers in Nome. She explained that her parents and their friends were overdue and shared their last known location from her mother's text, the Solomon River Bridge, about 35 miles out. The trooper on the line was calm, but his tone was serious. In Alaska, a report of overdue travelers is never taken lightly. The window for a successful rescue in the subarctic is brutally short. He assured Sarah they would start checking immediately. He took down the details of the rental vehicle, a dark gray Ford SUV, and the names of the four travelers. The initial response was fast. Troopers drove a portion of the Nome Council Highway, their headlights cutting through the gray afternoon. The weather had turned. A light but steady snow was falling, dusting the landscape in a fresh coat of white, and the temperature was dropping below freezing. The road was empty. No SUV. No tracks turning off the main path. Nothing. As darkness fell on the second day of their silence, the check-in became a formal missing persons case. The trooper called Sarah back, his voice grave. "We haven't found any sign of them on the main highway," he said. "We're escalating this to a full-scale search and rescue operation at first light. For the families waiting thousands of miles away, Those words were the start of an agonizing vigil. The last photo from Chloe, with its cheerful caption, "See you on the other side," now felt like a chilling prophecy. The four friends had driven into the vast Alaskan wilderness, and somewhere in that immense, silent landscape, they had simply vanished. Part 3. The Heroic Search. Dawn broke over Nome, revealing a world transformed. The light snow had become a thick, white blanket, burying the Seward Peninsula and erasing roads, trails, and any potential tracks. For the search teams, it was a monumental challenge. The wilderness was now actively working to hide any clue. The mobilization was immediate and impressive, a true testament to the tight-knit communities of rural Alaska. The Alaska State Troopers led the effort, establishing a command post at the Nome Volunteer Fire Department, which housed the city's experienced search and rescue unit. The room buzzed with grim urgency, maps pinned to the walls and radios crackling. The team was a coalition of professionals and volunteers. It included the Nome Volunteer Fire Department, the State Troopers, the City of Nome's Public Works Department, and medical support from Norton Sound Health Corporation. Soon, the Alaska Air National Guard joined, sending aircraft. And then came the citizen volunteers, dozens of them. Miners, fishermen, and locals who dropped everything, fired up their snowmobiles, and pulled on their gear to help. In a place like Nome, you just show up. Leading the ground search was a composite figure we'll call SAR Chief Jim West, Jr., a man who had spent his life in Nome, his face weathered by Arctic winds. At the first briefing, his message was blunt. "We're up against the weather and the clock," he told the teams. "They're tourists. They were on a day trip. Our job is to find them before the wilderness does." He drew a massive search grid on the map, starting from their last known point at the Solomon River. The scale of the search was staggering. Hundreds of square miles of trackless tundra, rolling hills, and frozen rivers. The new snow, over a foot deep in places, made ground travel treacherous. The weather was a relentless enemy. Wind chills dropped to near 0 Fahrenheit. For the missing, hypothermia was a certainty if they were exposed. The cold also battered the searchers and their equipment. Machines broke down. Batteries died. Frostbite was a constant threat. From the air, the view was a daunting, featureless expanse of white. The Air National Guard and private air companies flew grid patterns, their spotters scanning for any hint of color or shape that didn't belong. A glint of metal, a scrap of fabric, any trace of the gray SUV. But the fresh snow was a perfect camouflage. On the ground, it was a grueling slog. Snowmobile teams probed every drift and ravine along the 72-mile highway. They checked every public-use cabin and old mining shelter, hoping the group had found refuge. Each one was empty, the snow outside undisturbed. The community of Nome wrapped its arms around the effort and the families, who had flown in with faces etched in fear. Local families opened their homes to them. Restaurants provided free meals. People brought hot coffee to the command post. The town held a vigil at the local church, the small building overflowing with people praying for a miracle. Days blurred together. Every morning began with a flicker of hope, and every evening ended with despair as teams returned empty-handed. The emotional strain was immense. It was as if the four friends and their vehicle had been erased from existence. Chief West and his team revised their strategy constantly. They brought in drones with thermal cameras, hoping to detect a heat signature. But the biting wind and cold-soaked ground made the tech useless. After a week, they had covered over 1,000 square miles. Every road, trail, and shelter had been checked multiple times. The hope of finding them alive was fading. The mission was quietly shifting from rescue to recovery. The heroism of the searchers was undeniable, but they were fighting an opponent that couldn't be beaten. Part 4. The Cold Trail. By the second week, the frantic energy had settled into a grim, exhausting routine. The trail wasn't just cold, it was frozen solid, buried under new snow and the crushing weight of time. The total lack of evidence baffled everyone. No skid marks, no abandoned vehicle, not even a single footprint. Then, on day 9, a flicker of hope. A snowmobile team working a remote track found a small, dark object half buried in a drift, a black plastic lens cap, the kind for a telephoto lens. On it, the word Nikon. The discovery was radioed in, and for a moment, it felt like the breakthrough they'd been praying for. Eleanor Henderson was a photographer who used Nikon gear. The location was plausible. A helicopter and a specialized ground team were dispatched immediately. They cordoned off the area and began a meticulous, grid-by-grid search. Searchers were on their hands and knees, sifting through the snow with metal detectors and probes, looking for anything: keys, a wallet, another piece of camera equipment. They found nothing. The lens cap was completely alone. No tracks, no signs of a vehicle, nothing. After 2 days of the most intense, concentrated searching of the entire operation, the area yielded no other clues. The discovery that had sparked so much hope now only deepened the mystery. Was it Eleanor's? Or was it just a cruel coincidence, a piece of lost property from another time? The lens cap became a symbol for the entire case. A single, isolated fact leading absolutely nowhere. Other potential leads fizzled out just as frustratingly. A pilot reported a flash of light, but it turned out to be old mining debris. A trapper found faint tracks that ended up being from caribou. Every lead was a dead end. As the search entered its 14th day, Chief West had to make an agonizing decision. The operation couldn't go on forever. The costs were mounting, gear was failing, and the risk to the searchers themselves was becoming too great. The chances of survival were now zero. He met with the Henderson and Clark families in the quiet of the fire hall. With a heavy heart, he laid out the facts, showing them the maps of the thousands of square miles they had covered. "We have thrown everything we have at this," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Every person, every machine. We have found nothing. At this point, we have to make the hard decision to suspend the active, large-scale search." He was careful with his words. The search wasn't ended. It was suspended. The case would remain open, moving to a limited, continuous status. If any new information emerged, they would investigate. But the daily grid searches were over. For the families, the news was a devastating blow. It was the final, official extinguishing of the hope they had clung to. It was an admission that their loved ones were likely gone forever, their final resting place known only to the silent wilderness. There would be no funeral, no closure, just a gaping, unanswered question. The wilderness had won. It had taken 4 people, and it wasn't giving them back. Part 5. Legacy and Mystery. In the months and years that followed, the silence from the Alaskan wilderness was absolute. The spring thaw revealed none of its secrets. The disappearance of the 4 friends became a cold, haunting mystery, a local tragedy that turned into a cautionary tale. Without a body or any evidence, all that was left was speculation. What could have possibly happened that morning? The most straightforward theory is a tragic accident. Investigators believe the SUV might have slid off the road in an isolated area. The Nome Council Highway has narrow sections with steep drop-offs. A moment of distraction, a patch of ice. It could have sent the vehicle careening out of sight. Trapped and maybe injured, they would have been unprepared. As the storm rolled in, disorientation and hypothermia would have set in with terrifying speed. This explains the lack of evidence on the road, but it doesn't quite explain why extensive aerial searches never spotted a large SUV. A second theory suggests they left their vehicle voluntarily. Maybe they stopped to take photos and, captivated by the stark beauty, wandered a little too far. In the rolling tundra, it's shockingly easy to get turned around. A sudden snow squall could have erased their path back to the road. This fits with the discovery of the lens cap, but it begs the question, why would all 4 of them leave the safety of their car? Then there were darker theories, though they didn't seem to fit. The area around Nome has a history of mysterious disappearances, with dozens of people vanishing between 1960 and 2004. An FBI investigation concluded that most of these tragedies were likely due to the dangerous mix of alcohol and the brutal climate, not a serial killer or aliens as some speculated. But this didn't match the case of the 4 tourists. They weren't drinking, they vanished in broad daylight far from town, and there was no evidence of foul play. The legacy of the disappearance was felt most deeply in Nome and the Alaskan SAR community. The case became a sobering study of the reality that even with modern technology and heroic effort, the wilderness remains supreme. Inspired by the tragedy, the Henderson and Clark families channeled their grief into a foundation for wilderness safety. They began advocating for a wilderness alert system, similar to an Amber Alert, that could be broadcast to satellite phones and GPS devices in remote areas when travelers are reported overdue. The case also highlighted a broader issue. Alaska has the highest rate of missing persons per capita in the United States. Many are classified as environmental disappearances, where people are simply lost to the wild. The story of the four friends from Ohio put a new, national face to this quiet, ongoing tragedy. For the families, there was no resolution. There was only the aching void. Sarah Henderson kept the last photo her mother sent, the one of the Solomon River Bridge, trying to imagine their final hours. Were they happy? Were they scared? In the end, the story of David, Eleanor, Ben, and Chloe is a tribute to the human spirit, both its adventurous side and its heartbreaking fragility. They weren't reckless. They were thoughtful people who went in search of beauty. They found it, but they also found something more powerful. Their story is a profound, tragic reminder that in the Alaskan wilderness, the line between a dream and a nightmare is terrifyingly thin. They went looking for the edge of the world, and, in the most heartbreaking way, they found it.